When you look at systemic racism, you're looking at trends that have affected the wealth gap between the races historically in the United States. This is not about a person being a racist or your grandma being a racist. It has to do with what the economy looked like for white persons and black persons historically in this country. Back during the time of the Civil War, the white folks had 56 times more wealth on average than a black person. So it was 56 to 1. Just 10 years later, in 1870, after Reconstruction, that gap went from 56 to 1 to 23 to 1. Pretty dramatic improvement in 10 years. The reason for that market improvement is that while black people were now allowed to purchase land and assets, so black wealth was going up, simultaneously white wealth was coming down because what was a huge part of their wealth? Slaves. Human beings that they were no longer allowed to own. By 1900, the gap had closed all the way to 11 to 1. The average white person had 11 times more wealth than the average black person. And then it stalled out. And the reason it stalled out is because black people were still being discriminated against. They didn't have the same access to credit, if any access to credit. Legislative attempts at narrowing the gap were shot down, trying to finish narrowing the gap were shot down, like the 40 acres and a mule thing that never got passed. They faced widespread discrimination in education. The schools were still segregated and they weren't getting the best funding and they weren't getting the best teachers. They were discriminated against in the workforce. Now from 1900, when it was 11 to 1, to 1960, over 60 years, the gap squeezed a little bit smaller to 8 to 1. So for every black family that had $10,000 in total assets, the average white family had $80,000 in total assets, okay? And how did we go from 11 to 1 to 8 to 1? Well, a couple things happened. FDR made it illegal to discriminate against black workers, but only for purposes of the military and government positions. But still, every little bit helps. And then also, you had World War I and World War II. So many white men left the American workforce that black men were finally able to start moving up into higher paid positions. That doesn't mean they were paid the same as the white person who had previously done that job, but they were being paid more than they were previously, and they were getting access to higher skilled work. So then by the 1980s, the gap had closed to 5 to 1. And what was helping close the gap? Civil rights that had taken place between 1965 and 1980. Fair Housing Act, the federal minimum wage that did not discriminate. So those things were helping close that gap just a little bit. So that takes us up to 1980. But what has happened in the last 45 years? We were at 5 to 1 gap. How much have we closed since then? None. In the last 45 years, we've gone backwards. So we are now at a 6 to 1 gap. The average white family has 6 times more wealth than the average black family. And why is that happening? Well, because wealth compounds. It's not just about who has the ability to earn X salary. It's that the white families were starting with more wealth, more property, more stocks, bonds, etc. And they're able to compound that wealth. Whereas if the black and brown populations are starting without those assets, they don't have the ability to compound. They end up having to spend what they earn. They have to consume the majority of the income that they're earning just to sustain a living. This isn't about blaming an individual. It's not about vilifying people. What it is about is exploring and understanding the economics behind why we have that gap so that we can address those things with policy moving forward.